I pushed in the rear door of the Honeysuckle Cafe where I worked while most of the world was still asleep. Long shadows swirled on the deserted streets of my small town as the early morning light crept in. Amid the anxiousness that clung to me like an unwelcome second skin, I inhaled the comforting aroma of coffee beans and pastries. My strawberry blonde hair flew across my face as a surge of chilly wind blew through the entrance. I shrugged it off and got to work, preparing the morning's first batch of coffee. As I poured the water, a lingering memory of the life I left behind and of the guy I dreaded caused my hands to tremble a little. In this town, I had no friends and no relatives to turn to. I was completely alone. But it was better than having to live in fear of my abusive ex-boyfriend all the time. The fact that I didn't know who or where my parents were simply made me feel more alone. However, I had succeeded thus far, and I was determined to continue. The door chime sounded as the sun started to rise over the horizon. My chest was thumping as I glanced up, and there he was. The mysterious man who arrived every morning and seemed to follow me wherever I went despite never speaking. I forced a strong swallow while holding onto the counter. His silence made his glare much more ominous. As he moved to his normal spot in the otherwise quiet cafe, the sound of his boots reverberated throughout the space. Beyond a fleeting nod, he said nothing to me. I gave him his normal black coffee while attempting to maintain composure as our fingers momentarily touched. He didn't make eye contact when he paid in cash. I exhaled a sigh of relief as he went to his corner. The morning custom had ended. The normal morning clientele began to arrive at the cafe, their chit-chat and laughter lending life to the space. The silent man, however, was sitting in the middle of the group, in a corner, drinking his coffee and staring directly at me. The worry persisted and was the same every day. I constantly anticipated the other shoe dropping and my past catching up with me. However, for the time being, I was at this location working in the local coffee shop, leading a quiet life and remaining undetected. Towering above everyone who entered the Honeysuckle Cafe, the man was unsettling. He had a truck-like build, and his presence emanated an aura of unspoken power. Not a strand was out of place in his neatly styled short hair. However, it was his black, nearly ebony complexion that drew my attention. In the rare instances when the morning sun would catch it just right, it would appear to sparkle like a piece of polished obsidian. I noticed that I kept sneaking looks at him during the day to make sure he was still seated in his corner and immersed in whatever was going on there. His quiet fierceness had something about it that was both alluring and disturbing. Even though his sheer existence was a continual reminder of my worries, it was strangely comforting to know where he was, rather than having to wait for him to arrive. I pondered what attracted him here every day and what he saw when he glanced at me as I observed him from behind the counter. I was a barista in a tiny town coffee shop, a strawberry blonde girl, and a nobody. His steadfast focus, however, hinted otherwise. As the day dragged on, only the two of us remained in the cafe. The sound of his cup hitting the saucer as he completed his drink sometimes broke the silence, which was mostly filled by the buzz of the coffee makers. I observed him get up from the chair and walk over to the entrance. For the first time since he had come that morning, he turned and looked directly into my eyes. Before he left the cafe and I was left alone once again, we locked eyes for a brief period of time, his deep and perplexing. The remainder of the day went by quickly. Each of the regulars blended into the next as they came and went, but my thoughts kept coming back to the silent man, a stranger who had started to stand out in my otherwise unpredictable life. As night fell, I noticed that I was eagerly anticipating the following morning, our ongoing, silent conversation, and yet another opportunity to blend in. He had been an anchor, a source of stability in a world that had been anything but, despite the fear and the uncertainty. I closed my eyes for a while and took a deep breath. The following day would be another opportunity to hide and another chance to survive. I would also be prepared. The cafe was mostly empty by the time the afternoon came, leaving me alone with my thoughts. When Heather called in sick, I offered to stay and assist Maggie, the cafe owner, and she was appreciative. Heather, one of the few locals I could nearly consider a friend, had to go be with her son since he was ill. I went back into the rear room to grab my belongings at around 4 o'clock. The room was illuminated by the slanted late afternoon light that entered through the small window. I unconsciously let out a breath since it was quiet back here, away from the busy sounds of the cafe. Even though my shift had been lengthy, I had grown accustomed to and could manage this level of fatigue. The routine and familiarity of the current chores had a reassuring quality. This was my safe haven and my sanctuary, despite the looming shadow of my past and the intrigue surrounding the quiet man. I couldn't help but look at the clock as I tucked my shabby apron into my suitcase and checked my phone for any messages. Another day had passed, another day when I'd been able to hide and remain secure. Even if my life wasn't much, it was still mine. And for the time being, that was enough. After turning out the lights, I moved towards the back exit while briefly looking back at the deserted cafe. The hushed crowd, the silent man, and the soothing buzz of the coffee maker were all gone at this point, leaving only echoes of the previous day. I left the room after locking the door and entered the calm afternoon. The sky was flooded in orange and pink hues as the sun started to set. It was lovely in its own straightforward manner. I inhaled deeply, letting the serenity of the moment envelop me. I turned and started the short walk home after casting one last glance at the Honeysuckle Cafe, feeling prepared for whatever lay ahead of me.